So the Torah portion this week is Miketz, and Isabel will be speaking a little bit about one particular section of this week's Parsha that I alluded to last week as I started to sing little Andrew Lloyd Webber. Well, I was wandering along by the... But did you watch the YouTube this week? Did you like it? Rabbi Norman Cohen is with us tonight, and will be with us throughout this weekend and many of the Shabbatot coming up. Thank you, Rabbi Cohen, for that. You want me to sing more, don't you? So, Miketz begins with these fat cows and skinny cows and sheaves of corn and other sheaves of corn and as you remember from the musical, the Pharaoh hears about Joseph, the dream interpreter calls him up out of prison. There's a very interesting set of verbs that are used in describing how it is that Joseph gave meaning and interpreted and in a very predictive way said to the Pharaoh what was going to happen. If you remember last week, Joseph predicts that in his dreams at the beginning of the Parsha. What does he predict in the beginning of the Parsha last week with his dreams? No, we're at the famine is this week's Parsha. What did he predict at the beginning of the Parsha last week with the dreams, with his siblings, and even his no longer living mother? Don't all shout out at once. Zachary Shalson, please. Everyone's going to bow down to him. Everyone will be subservient to him. This week's Parsha is the beginning of the fulfillment. Joseph is very good at predicting things. He has an incredible... Who here thinks they have incredible intuitive skills, by the way? Usually people who jump up and say they have strong intuitive skills actually do not. So that means a lot of people here actually have very strong intuitive skills. But if you think about the sets of dreams, last week's dreams are all about who? All about, or what? Joseph, this sort of arrogant, narcissistic, good-looking, handsome teenage boy. You know, Manish Tana, a teenage kid who's focused on themselves, right? And they're all about him. This week, however, now that he's down in prison, this week's dreams are focused on what? Famine. I'm going to go back to whoever said famine before. This is focused on, therefore, thank you for jumping in. Last week, people couldn't shout in enough and participate this week. It must be because it dropped below 72 today, and everyone is like, oh, hello, Alaska. It was about the community. So last week's dreams are about him and his self-absorbed teenagerness. This week's dreams are about the Pharaoh and the community. Joseph became the savior, if you will, of Egypt. These two verbs, going back to this, that are used in advance of the Pharaoh's appointing someone before Joseph gets called. The helpers, the courtiers of the Pharaoh, basically say that he should find someone, navon ve'hacham. He uses two verbs. They say, you know, Pharaoh, you're having bad dreams. You've got a lot of anxiety, a lot of shpilkas. You need to find someone who is navon and someone who is hacham. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what those words mean? I said verbs, nouns. They're describing the kind of person. Does anyone want to guess? You all know what a chacham is. A wise guy, but not a wise guy, someone who's wise. And what's a navon? What? So you're taking it as it's a play on the word navi, which is someone who's prophetic. But what's another way of seeing the word, or translating the word navon? Huh? A who? Hamevi yavi, which means? Can you translate that into Farsi, please? Someone who is learned. Discerning. Thank you very much, because that is actually the translation that the most Torah commentaries use. So there are two words that they say. The courtiers are sitting around. The Pharaoh's got a shpilkus. What do I do? Who's going to interpret my dreams? Find someone who is a navon and a chacham, someone who is discerning and someone who is wise. Does anyone want to take a guess as to why they didn't say to Pharaoh, go find someone who's wise, period, or go find someone who is discerning, period? Why both? Why are both in this description of the kind of person that the Pharaoh should find to interpret his dreams? Anyone want to take a guess? Checks and balances. Please, can you describe that a little bit more? I'm really liking you. Yeah. Not only for your participation, but for the quality of your answers. So someone checks and balances, someone can be wise. A king can be wise. Okay, that's an Alaska thing, I think. So there's a check and a balance. Someone who's wise, typically we feel like someone who's wise is someone who is all-knowing. My grandmother of blessed memory, very wise, right? Very wise. It comes with age and experience. Discerning, by the way, wise people who are wise, tend to, in our view of them, be really sweet and kind. That's why I went straight to my grandmother. But discerning, what is discerning? What's different about discerning? Implicit, not necessarily explicit in the word. What's a discerning person able to do? Evaluate, huh? Oh, they have insight. Okay, good. What else? Tell it like it is. A judge is someone who we think of as discerning. And the thing about a judge or a discerning person is in our view, they tend to be sometimes black and white and objective. And as Gail said, they tell it like it is. So you're absolutely right. It's good to have a balance between someone who is wise, maybe has experience, and someone, I see a wise person as someone who leads with their heart, decides with their heart, whereas someone who's discerning is someone who leads with their rational brain, their intelligence, their thoughts. And they can be harsh sometimes, because sometimes a discerning person is going to tell you something you don't want to hear. And that is why the Pharaoh wants someone who is both of these aspects of human character, navon and a hacham, a discerning person who is sage, who is wise, who will store. By the way, Joseph eventually, from both places, tells the Pharaoh, why don't you store the food then for 7 years? He interprets the dreams. And then during the 7 years of famine, we'll have enough food. That, by the way, is the part of the story that helps us know that Joseph's brothers will come down looking for food. I want to share with you a commentary that I read this week, and in conclusion, I think we'll bring this all up, because I think that, our community, whether it's here locally or nationally or internationally, we're going to need some wise and discerning people eventually, because the whole enterprise is probably going to fall apart if we don't allow and listen to the voices of the wise and discerning among us. And this is the commentary. To lead a people, to be a leader, a true leader, one must know about more than just power. The realities of human life, the concerns that fill their daily schedules and plague their nights, these must be familiar to anyone who would represent a community and seek to direct their affairs. This commentary has taken this idea of wise and discerning, of a navon and a chacham, to say these are the two elements that make someone a good leader. And the first idea here is that a good leader is not someone who sees their position as mere power. A broader approach to these categories builds upon the understanding of Rambam, of Moses Maimonides, from the 12th century. The first category applies to human learning and human structures, and the second category applies to natural phenomena and properties. To be considered discerning and wise, requires education in the humanities and the social sciences and the natural sciences as well, which makes a lot of sense coming from Maimonides because he was, after all, a rabbi and a philosopher and a physician. A fully educated human being must know not only about ourselves and our communities, but also about the world around us. A third understanding, this commentary suggests, is possible as well. Perhaps these two categories refer to the importance of both Jewish and Gentile learning. Many Jews today know the writings of Shakespeare, Freud, Hawkins, but are unfamiliar with who Yehuda Halevi is, or Rambam that I just mentioned, or Abraham Joshua Heschel. That form of illiteracy, of ignorance of Jewish thought and religion, limits us to an impoverished and anemic relationship to Judaism and ultimately to God. Similarly, to only know Jewish sources, Torah, Talmud, and Midrash, represents no less a shortcoming than not knowing them at all. In the words of the Talmud itself, this concludes, if you are only to have Torah, then you don't even have Torah. Learning both Jewish and general, both about natural reality and human society and personality, is an essential ingredient in becoming fully human and becoming discerning and sage. So what we learn from this commentary and putting it together with the Parsha's emphasis on the Pharaoh seeking an answer to his dreams that is both discerning and wise is that we ourselves must become more well-rounded. As we live in a society that is becoming increasingly fractured and increasingly bifurcated and increasingly rigid, where in order for me to be right, you must be wrong, we have lost a sense of balance, of the skill, if you will, as the Pharaoh's courtiers are advising him, to have both thought and feeling, to have both intellect and emotion, to have both wisdom and the ability to discern a situation objectively. These are our challenges, and it starts with us. That balance is critical in finding a conversation or a debate or a dialogue or an interpretation of events, supernatural or not. It's critical in order to start to find answers that will be helpful, because right now we have too many answers in our society, not enough questions. So on this Shabbat, I hope that you will take these ideas with you to your Shabbat tables and perhaps tomorrow on a walk or on a hike, and think about how it is that all of us as individuals can find balance, not to find expertise necessarily in any one given thing, but knowledge of a variety of things, to find balance in how it is that we think and make decisions, and ultimately how it is that we teach our children. So on this Shabbat, I wish for you to become both Navons and both Chachams, and take that challenge as a way of, again, finding, I pray, more questions than answers. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. I'm so happy to call upon Jack.